right. Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Wood, and I'm the Executive Director of the Raymond A. Wood Foundation. Thank you for joining us tonight. We are honored to be here with Dr. Jennifer Miller, who's a professor in the Division of Pediatric Endocrinology. She earned her MD from the University of Florida in 1998 and her MS in clinical investigation from the same institution in 2005. Dr. Miller has completed all of her training in pediatrics and pediatric endocrinology at the University of Florida. Her expertise lies in care and treatment of individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome and other genetic causes of early onset excessive weight gain, and also in hypothalamic obesity. So welcome, Dr. Miller. And today, in honor of Rare Disease Week, which is taking place right now, and many of our colleagues are on the Hill doing some great advocacy work this week, we wanted to talk about research, which is one of my favorite subjects I'm learning so much about, but just because it's just so important in our for our patient community in craniopharyngioma and all of the other issues that come along with it. So Jen, I'm going to go ahead and throw it to you to get started.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me to do this tonight. I appreciate it. And I'm very excited to do it on Rare Disease Week because I agree research is super important, especially for individuals affected by rare diseases. So rare disease means that there's a significantly smaller pool of possible participants for research studies, as you know. And many clinical trials, or actually all clinical trials, have very strict and specific inclusion criteria, which further limits the possible population for participation in the trial. And so, one of the things that we've discovered through years of working with people with rare diseases is that trials are often talked about on social media sites like the craniopharyngioma support group site and things like that, but not all patients or patient families are on social media. So, I know of 3 families, for example, that live in Gainesville that would have qualified for the current clinical trial we're doing with Rhythm on setmelanotide that had no idea it was going on because they weren't at all connected through social media. Can you click to the next slide, please?
Yeah.
And so, sorry, I wanted to talk tonight about the importance specifically of participating in things like registry studies, but also the impact of your voice, both as caregivers and patients in research studies. Can you go to the next slide?
Yeah.
And so your voice actually helps define areas of importance for researchers. It defines priorities for the development of new treatments, and it sheds light on unmet needs. It's really critically important for caregivers and patients to participate in again, things like registries or questionnaire studies or things like that in order to help shape the face of future research for this population. Also, you guys all inform regulatory agencies on the patient and caregiver views and perspectives, and you're all talking about the willingness you have to take a risk in specifically research and research drugs with regards to treatment, because the symptoms that we're working on or targeting with these research studies are just so critically important for your families that I think people with rare diseases are almost definitely more likely to accept more risk with certain medications that potentially will provide more benefit for them in terms of outcomes. Can you go to the next slide? And so the roles that you can play, go ahead to the next slide, please, are really critical. So this is just an example. This is so as you may be aware, the Raymond A. Wood Foundation has a registry that they have started, and that registry recently showed that craniopharyngioma patients have hyperphagia about 70% of the time post-treatment of craniopharyngioma. Now, the literature says 50%. Every clinician that you ask will also verify that it's about 70% of their population that suffer from hyperphagia post-treatment of craniopharyngioma. So the registry data confirms what clinicians think that we're seeing, but we don't have that data the same way that you can gather it in a registry. We only have our very specific patient population. And so the registry was really critical in saying, you know what, it's not what's in the literature. It's not 50%, it's more than that. And that's really important in terms of unmet need. So we can say that 70% of patients with craniopharyngioma actually have hyperphagia. That's a huge unmet need within the population. And so the registry information that is gathered by the Raymond A. Wood Foundation actually sheds light on things like this in terms of unmet need and the true patient numbers of certain things that occur post treatment or resection or whatever for the tumor. Next slide. The other benefits I think of participating in research are meeting others with the same diagnosis. At our site, we bring in multiple patients at once for each research study. So, because often many families, if they're not connected through social media, have never been exposed to other people or children with the same condition. And it's stunning to them, to sit in a room and be like, wait, that person has what I have, and that person has what I have, and that person has what I have. It really it gives them a home. Like they feel connected, they feel a community, and that's huge. It also lets them make friends with one another, and we certainly have seen friendships grow during studies that we've done with this particular population. And the other thing is in things like placebo-controlled trials, what really is beneficial is being able to see results with your own eyes. So the current trial that we're conducting with Rhythm for craniopharyngioma patients is a year-long placebo-controlled trial. One of the benefits of having all these people come in at once is that those who may be on placebo and are not having effects from the drug are able to see the dramatic effects that the drug is having for those that are being treated with it. And that gives them hope, right? And hope allows you to continue in a clinical trial. Even if you're not personally seeing success because you may be on placebo, it gives you that hope that we're going to get there, and look at these results. And there's going to be a drug, right, that helps our population because you're seeing what's happening to these individuals who are being treated. Next slide, Amy. Uh-oh, that's in the wrong order. But we can start here. Do you want to start here, Amy? You're on mute.
I'm sorry. No, we'll go back to that. Sorry about that.
Oh, you're right. Okay, here we are. Sorry. All right. So, what are the best ways for patients and caregivers to voice their views and perspective? If you want to go to the next slide, it's really participation in surveys, like I said, and registry data. I think one of the most critical aspects right now for rare diseases is patient registries, to get as many patients as possible into registries so that when it comes time for clinical research questions or studies, that the foundation can actually look at their registry and say, we have this many patients that would qualify for your study, or this is a major unmet need that our patient population has sort of endorsed, and we need drugs to help address that unmet need. Additionally, ways to participate are participating in clinical research trials and clinical trials. It's really important to participate in all phases of clinical trials. And that's sometimes hard to remember because everybody would, of course, love to get drugs when drugs become available, but in clinical trials, but there has to be a placebo population. And so people have to participate and full well knowing that their child may not get drug right away and may get placebo, but with the hope that this will benefit the entire population over time as people participate in these trials. Next slide. And so why are patient registries so important? You get the next slide, Amy. Mm-hmm. They're important because they collect patient perspectives over time. They take things like craniopharyngioma that are rare and complex, and they make broad participation essential. So what they do is they allow people to put in their own personal experience and information so that other people within the community and within the foundation can learn from their experience, and then it helps generalize out in terms of, again, what are unmet needs, what patient populations are potentially available to participate, what patient numbers are affected by certain conditions. And so a diverse registry ensures a strong and reliable and impactful data set that's really critical. The foundation for their registry needs all ages. They need diverse socioeconomic backgrounds with diverse ethnic and global backgrounds, not just people from the United States, but from all over the world. And that larger patient registry helps amplify the patient voice and drives meaningful change in terms of treatment alternatives. I mean, the Raymond A. Wood Foundation, I can say this, has been critical in pushing this study with setmelanotide that's currently ongoing for craniopharyngioma patients forward. If it hadn't been for this foundation and their registry, I don't know that this trial would have ever gotten started, because I had personally been asking the company to do this trial for many years and it wasn't moving forward. It took the foundation coming forward and saying, look, this is how many patients need treatment, in order for the company to say, okay, we're going to do the trial because we see a great unmet need. And so I think that that's really critically important, is for you guys to remember that while this does take time to fill out the surveys in the registry and to answer the questions, it is absolutely critical in terms of moving future research forward. The other thing it does is, in rare diseases, because there is a smaller patient population, sometimes you may not get the results that you sort of anticipate in terms of clinical research trials. So it may not be statistically significant, although it is clinically significant to those who are involved in the trial. The registry provides background data, so natural history data, by which you can compare any treatment that you're doing to the registry information. So you can compare the natural history of the condition with the clinical trial results. And that the FDA will use as evidentiary data in order to push drugs forward and approve them. So registries are really, really critically important in many aspects of clinical research. But to me, that is one of the most important, is that it may serve as background information that the FDA can use against which to base the results of clinical trials. Because I always say, if a drug is successful for even one person, then it's successful, right? We need treatments, and it's not going to be the same treatment for everyone. And I well recognize that, as probably all do you. But to be able to use that registry data to say, yes, it may have only impacted, one or two people, but it impacted them dramatically, I think is really, really important. And so I think that, to me, one of the main reasons to have a big registry and a diverse registry is for that purpose, to use as background information against which clinical trials can be measured. Next slide. All right, we're going to do polling.
Great. Okay, we're gonna see if this works. We just want to ask you a couple questions. You can answer them. It's anonymous. Um, and also, I just want to note, if you have questions for Dr. Miller, please drop them in the chat or in the QA section of the Zoom webinar, and we will make sure that I ask them. Let's see if this poll thing works. Give it a shot. All right, here we go. All right, so the first question is, have you ever participated in a research study related to you or your loved one's condition? So I'll give everyone a couple minutes.
Oh, this is cool.
Isn't it fun? It's so fun. If it can make it work, it's great, right? Technology.
Technology. This is awesome.
So it looks like we're a little over half are yeses that have participated. We have 38% no, and we have 8% that are not sure. So that's good. That's nice to know.
It is very nice to know. And I would say that what's most important about that information is the 38% who haven't participated. Hopefully, this webinar will give you some information in order to allow you to have access to more information about clinical trials. Sometimes people haven't participated because they don't qualify, but other times they haven't participated because they simply didn't know trials that were ongoing. And so, again, by participating in a registry trial, you then open up your world of research for your child or yourself.
Let me ask you a question. Do you have examples in your work or in work in the diseases that you specialize in, like PWS or HO, where well, not HO because we're still working on that, but in PWS, where registry data was helpful or changed the outcome of a treatment?
Well, we're crossing our fingers that it changes the outcome of a treatment. But we do have a drug trial in PWS where the first trial, the randomized placebo controlled portion of the trial occurred during COVID. And COVID, of course, screwed with the results because they were questionnaire results. And so the drug did not meet its primary endpoint. And the registry data was able to be put against the data from the drug trial so that you could see. And there were 300 or 600 participants in the registry. So we had the whole natural history of individuals with PWS, for example, that we could compare over years in the registry to the study and what happened over years in the study. So that natural history data again provided a background for the FDA so they could see this is what naturally happens and this is what happened with the drug trial, and that gives them a good comparison. And we know that there have been other drugs approved for other rare diseases whereby the registry data was actually the confirmatory data for the results of the study. FDA really cares a lot about statistically significant. And in rare diseases where you have smaller patient populations and smaller studies, it's often really difficult to get statistical significance. But to me, statistical significance is not as important as clinical significance. And that's where the registry data comes in. So you can see in the registry that there's really highly significant differences between drug treatment results and those and what the natural history of the condition is.
Thank you. Let's maybe try our next question. So for those of you who have participated in research, the question is, what type of study was it? So let's see if I can make that work. Here we go. Hopefully everyone can see. Okay, here we go. I was nervous for a minute. While this is being answered, do you see possibilities of, I think we're in a really exciting place right now in hypothalamic obesity with several potential treatments being tried, maybe more on the horizon here shortly. Do you see any opportunity, especially collecting data around hyperphagia, hunger, et cetera? Do you see opportunity where some meaningful endpoints could be included in the future that are meaningful to us as the patient family community?
Absolutely. Absolutely, I do. And so I think that, one of the things that's come out of these clinical trials that we've done in individuals with HO, well, one thing I think that really, Amy, you taught me the other day that I think is of critical significance is not calling it HO specifically, but calling it hypothalamic syndrome, which sort of destigmatizes it in the eyes of other people, to me, I think. And it allows us to have ICD-10 codes that will hopefully allow insurances to reimburse and cover drugs for this specific condition. So that was an aside. But yes, I definitely have seen things come to light through these clinical trials and through the research that I've done, that are sort of unrecognized areas of need. So hyperphagia, of course, being one of the most obvious, but there are many more. I mean, I think that definitely post-treatment for craniopharyngioma, in addition to things like HO, there's all kinds of questions that revolve around, for example, best treatment of diabetes insipidus, and how to manage that, and best management of sodium, and how to manage that. And but also socialization stuff, and peer interactions, bullying, activity levels. There's just so much that affects this patient community that has come to light for me that has made me want to do 1,000 more studies. Once we have one drug approved, I think it will open the door for other medications, and I think that's really critical.
So in our poll, I'm not sure if y'all can see this one, but a patient registry. So we have 43% of you participated in a patient registry, so that's exciting. Clinical trial, we have 43% as well. a survey or interview, also 43%. We have 14% in genetic research, 7% in a biomarker study, some in other, which can certainly, you can pop into the chat, or those, we have 29% who have not participated in research. Okay. Oh, here it is, share results. Learning. Great. Okay, so that's exciting. I mean, would you have any, and maybe this, we go on to our next whole question, and then we can maybe address my question.
Okay.
So this question 3 would be, for those of you who haven't participated, or do you feel more motivated after hearing Dr. Miller talk? And we'll still talk further, but I'm just curious, also what might be the barriers to people not participating in research, and maybe touch on that first, Dr. Miller, and then we can launch this poll. But what do you think are the barriers, and what would you say? And we can kind of look at clinical trial barriers or participating in registry, which I could also, I probably have some ideas on what those barriers are, but yeah, what are your thoughts there?
So I think some of the barriers are travel for clinical trials. Often patients are difficult to travel with. It does take a lot of time. It's a humongous effort, as those of you who have participated in clinical trials can attest to. I mean, often we require patients to travel every month, which is a very big deal. If your child, for example, has gained a significant amount of weight, or has behavioral issues, or has issues with adrenal crisis when you're flying because they get so stressed out, so there's a lot of travel issues that I feel like play a big role in being a barrier to participation in clinical trials. What is required from the families is another big barrier to me. These trials require a lot of intensive effort from families, and I have tried to bring these companies' expectations down to reality, that you really don't need people to record 10,000 pieces of data every day. But I've been unsuccessful. And so those of you who know, have participated in clinical trials, know that it is a big load to carry when you participate in a clinical trial. And a lot of you, and most of you, actually have so much going on in your world that makes it really difficult to continue participation in a trial because of everything that's required just on a day-to-day basis. I think that's a huge barrier. And I really think this is where the patient voice can come into being very critical, is as companies are developing new treatment trials, to speak up and say, listen, we don't have time for this. We can't do all this stuff that you want us to do. Like, be realistic and let us do what counts. I think that's really important. So those are two of the biggest barriers. For registry data, Amy, I'll let you speak to this as well, but one of my things that I've seen from being the PI of certain patient registries over years is the sort of the load at the beginning of answering all of those questions that come with entering into a registry data. The load lessens over time, but that initial impact is huge on families. It does take a significant amount of time and effort to complete those surveys.
Yeah, I think what's exciting about our registry currently is we have 200 plus participants, those who have registered in the registry, which is amazing, but less than half have completed their surveys. So the first barrier is getting people registered and into the study or into the registry. But it seems our second biggest barrier is getting people to do the surveys. And I will be the first to say that, especially the initial set might be overwhelming, and there's some questions that seem daunting, but I think realistically it's safe to say that it probably takes about an hour. So it's, pour yourself a cup of coffee, sit down, and dedicate an hour to it. But I'd love to see our surveys, I'd love to see more than half completed. I think that's going to be really important. And companies that are developing clinical trials or developing therapies for various things like hypothalamic obesity. And then, of course, we're also developing a sodium meter for testing blood sodium at home for our DI patients. Having this data is critical. And so being able to have these completed surveys is going to make a huge difference in how we're able to affect outcomes. And so, yes, it's a lot. And it is, like you said, Dr. Miller, it's the first set, but it lessens over time. So that's good news. The other thing I think people are a little nervous about is data protection and fair. I mean, there's a lot of concern about protecting your health information, data breaches. We're on the National Organization for Rare Disorders platform, which is highly secure, has all the security in place, and is also host to multiple patient registries in the rare disease space. So we feel very confident that that data is well protected. Always risks, always, but we do all of our best efforts to be sure that all of that, and it's de-identified data. So none of that data goes out with your name attached to it. So it's all de-identified. And we're working to be very good stewards of that data to make sure it goes into the right hands. So we have a registry advisory board that oversees all of any of the data queries that come in, as well as any studies that will be done in the registry.
I
Anything you
actually,
want to add?
yeah, I was going to say, I actually personally think the coolest part of patient registries is that people like me, for example, can query the registry as an investigator and say, I want to look at sodium levels or treatment of DI, different modalities of administering DDAVP in patients with DI. And that data hopefully, will be in the registry, and Amy can say, okay, we have, 300 people who have answered that question, and we can give you that de-identified data provided our committee agrees that this is a reasonable research question to ask. And so it's protected from people just like randomly asking questions, but it's also available to researchers who have quality questions to ask. And I think it's important, as Amy said, in the development of new drugs, but also really honestly in sort of opening up, information for clinicians to so that we know what questions to ask, and what patients feel is important, and what things we're not maybe doing the best of, I mean, so I think that kind of information is critical. I mean, I think also in this particular registry, one of the things that I find fascinating is the number of therapies that people have been on or tried for things like hyperphagia or hypothalamic obesity. And that information is really not out there in the literature at all. But we all know, as parts of this population, how many different things people have tried through the years to affect appetite and weight in this population. And it's frankly stunning to see those numbers, and to realize, how people are really, really trying to affect change on their own children or for their own children in the absence of drug trials, in the past. And even now, until a drug is approved, I think people are still going to be willing to try anything they can to try to help their child. And I respect that, but I also think it's very important information for doctors and clinicians to have.
Yes, thank you. Just a reminder, we are going to open it up to questions. So if you have questions for Dr. Miller, you can drop them in the chat or the QA. And then we have this poll question. So after learning more today, do you feel more motivated, or do you feel motivated to participate in research opportunities in the future? And I'm going to try to do this. Hold on. I don't know why it keeps hiding it from me. What is going on? I think it's just, let's see. So that would be my, there we go. Okay.
I have to put the readers back on again to see the answer.
Yeah. Oh, I never take them off. So. Oh, so we have the gold star. Yes, I see the value and want to be involved. That's exciting. It's okay. Y'all can be honest if you
Yes,
need more
please be
information
honest.
or no, you're not into it. Totally understand. Um, so yeah, I think that it's really, I think the word research in general can seem a little scary. I know a lot of us, when put in this situation, have become our own researchers and have learned to read the clinical reports and have learned to interpret things that we never thought we would. Um, I think to your point about it being hard, I think also placebo is somewhat disconcerting because you're putting a lot of time and effort into something that where you may not be getting the drug immediately anyway, so then there's the period of time where you wait. So I think it's a lot, but in the on the upside, there's just it just opens so many doors, and I think there's just a value in feeling like you're contributing. I feel like action is therapy. If I didn't, I wouldn't be doing this. Um, but I feel like, all of us can get involved in some way. This is a really good way to do it. And if participating in a clinical trial feels out of reach, a really soft touch is getting into the registry.
I will say it is absolutely one of my very favorite things about this entire community is how motivated families are to participate in things purely for the greater good. I mean, it has really touched my heart in so many ways to hear people say, well, if my kid doesn't get the drug right away, that's okay. This person seems a little worse off than my kid, and I would love to see them get the drug and see what it does for them. I mean,
Mhm.
this community is just so altruistic. It's unbelievable to me. It's just a fantastic community. I've loved getting to be involved with it. And I do think that one of the great things that comes from having an advocacy system like the Raymond A. Wood Foundation is that they're not going to let you be on a drug trial that's placebo controlled and then just ends. You get drug or placebo and it's done, right? You guys are absolutely advocating for these drug trials to allow everyone access to the drug who participates in the trial and to have open label extensions if the drug seems to work. And honestly, to me, that is a huge benefit of, again, things like the Raymond A. Wood Foundation and the registry information, because then we can follow this long term, versus the natural history. But my friends who are involved in like type 1 diabetes research, they say we don't have any trials like you have. They're like, we're one and done. Like you're either drug or placebo, and then it's over, and that's the end. And they just can't believe that these companies will continue to supply drug for open label extensions, will allow people who were on placebo or drug to continue on to these open label extensions. It's really a beautiful thing for rare diseases. I tell companies all the time, this is the carrot that the population needs to participate. But I know I'm not the reason that this happened. This happens because of those people that you have providing advocacy for your community.
Thank you. And I think this is a really good question. Amy asked, other than the Raymond A. Wood Foundation, what is the best way to learn about studies we might qualify for?
Oh, I don't know the answer other than through clinical
I can give, yeah, I
trials.
mean, clinicaltrials.gov is one resource. We actually have a clinical trial finder on our website. So you can go to our website and it specifically queries clinicaltrials.gov and then pulls that data out and puts it into a format that's like way more understandable and clear. So it pulls data or it pulls trials on craniopharyngioma, any sort of hypothalamic pituitary tumor, as well as hypothalamic obesity, arginine vasopressin deficiency, which there isn't really a study in right now, but anything is tagged in our rare disease list per se. So that's a good spot. But yeah, it's really, I think it's kind of staying in touch with the patient advocacy organizations because we are the ones kind of that are disseminating that information the most. The drug companies themselves put the content out there too, but you would have to know which company is sponsoring a trial. So clinicaltrials.gov is definitely a place to monitor, but you can also check our website and our clinical trial finder. And then, of course, following us on social media and checking there as well. Anything you want to add? I think that's really
I
not a
think
whole
that's
lot of.
right. No, I think that's right. I would love to be able to say, ask your clinician, who's taking care of you, your endocrinologist or whatever. But unfortunately, we've seen that a lot are just simply unaware of what's going on in the research world. It, as somebody who primarily does research, it was a little surprising to me to learn how little my colleagues knew about clinical research in craniopharyngioma or HO. So again, I wish I could say ask your clinician, but unfortunately, I don't think that's going to be the right answer for most people. But for
Yeah, I think
patients, you can ask me.
yeah, I think the ones that are really tapped into that are really involved, like you and some of our other endocrinologists that work really closely in the craniopharyngioma space and hypothalamic obesity will know. But yeah, unfortunately, outside of that, it would be hard to hear that from them. So I think, even just trying to maybe put a Google alert on the disease so that if things pop up around it, that might help too. But yeah, it's limited. And I see a lot of people asking, if they can still enroll in the setmelanotide trial, which is not currently enrolling. There's two new ones, or the oral dose is
It's full.
almost complete. It's full. And then there might be one opening up shortly, but but again, a lot of these, we collaborate a lot with these companies so we can help getting the word out about what's available. Okay, so Frederick wants to know, how do we tell pharmaceutical companies that during trials and studies we want to be able to travel with other patients?
Yeah, that has to go through the research coordinator most likely at the specific site. That becomes very difficult to you can't let sponsors like they don't know who you are, right? I mean, it's anonymous. And so it has to go through specifically the people that are running the clinical trial at the site that you're at. But it is, as you know, I mean, Frederick, it is very it's very critical to have, that those connections with people and to be able to, you know, I mean, it just gives you again, it feels like a medical home, right? When you get to see these people over and over again and you become friends with the families and, I mean, it is really critical. Unfortunately, there's no way to let the companies know that. That has to be done individually through the sites.
I think your site is a bit unique in that you do kind of create that sort of community. So I do know, depending on the site that you go to, it might be a different setup. So
That is true.
yeah. So in some cases, in some sites, you wouldn't even know the other patients that were going, so you wouldn't likely have that opportunity to travel with them. So that would be something that's very unique, I think. I do know, having talked to some other companies, or another company that's interested in a potential therapy for hypothalamic obesity, that they're very in touch with us not having to come to site very often and doing more virtual visits. And I think that's really nice to hear, because I think, again, it is really challenging to travel. For my son, it's we prepare mentally for it days ahead. um, it's so I appreciated hearing that they were in touch with that. So that's nice. Um, Anyone else have any questions? They asked that we remove the screen so that they could see our faces, which is really, yeah, a good point. But I wanted to just share one thing really quickly, and Zoom keeps taking away my, there we go. Is I just wanted to share the link. So shameless plug, obviously, for our clinical trial, but I just wanted, or our registry, but I just wanted to share the links to the registry and let you know that, we have support available. So if you are trying to get into the registry or have questions about surveys or need help, you can email our registry at rawoodfoundation.org. And Natalie, who is overseeing the registry, is very happy to help. And we'd love to see if you have signed up for the registry, that you go in and complete your surveys, because that would be wonderful, and it helps us. We have a really fascinating study going on right now on the hunger behavior and craniopharyngioma, and we also opened up a survey on treatment priorities. So we want to hear from you what you want to see treatments for, what you want to see, what is important to you. And Michelle has a question. Do the various main centers that perform and care for people with craniopharyngiomas know about the registry to share with their patients? That's a good question. We have actually been working get the word out to most of our, most of the areas or centers we know that really work in craniopharyngioma. And on our registry advisory board, we have St. Jude, we have Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, we have, some of the centers that really are focused on this tumor. But we also would love for you to tell your doctors and your clinicians and providers that this is out there, because sometimes we don't get to them. And we've had providers come to us and say, our patients told us about the Raymond A. Wood Foundation. And a lot of times they're looking for the handheld blood analyzer to find out about the sodium meter or that kind of thing. So you telling them is really helpful too. And if you've heard about a clinical trial, you telling them that might help another patient as well find out about the availability of something. Any thoughts about that, Jen? But I that's
No, I think, one of the things actually that I was going to ask you for at some point was some handouts or a brochure, like a one pager that we could put in clinic for patients,
mhm.
to have access to. Because again, when I learned that 3 of our patients in Gainesville, that I'm not their primary endocrinologist, but my colleagues are, had no idea about the Raymond A. Wood Foundation, nor about the clinical trials that were currently going on. It was a little sad and surprising to me because I talk about trials all the time to my colleagues. So, but I think it just doesn't necessarily cross their mind to mention it to patients all the time. Um, one of the things that you and I have talked about is that HO, hypothalamic obesity, you can control that. Some people have really good control over the environment and the diet and such like that, and can control the weight for a period of time. And so if my colleagues are seeing a person who has good control over their weight, but maybe still has really bad issues with appetite that are affecting everything about their lives, they may not even bring that up because if the weight is fine, they're not even going to pay attention to the fact that this is a possible comorbidity of tumor treatment. And so having, handouts in these clinics actually, or for even, if you sign up for the registry, maybe you get a one pager to, give to your clinician or whatever, I think that's valuable just so that it does get the word out a little bit more. So that was just my take on it.
Yeah, I think that's, and we could start a whole nother conversation about hypothalamic syndrome, but I think that it's a really good point that we have patients that have hyperphagia that have, but are in very controlled environments and maybe don't have the obvious, visual signs, but, being independent is not possible because, so, I think that's a really good point that maybe it didn't resonate because again they were thinking obesity only, so that is another thing we're tackling down the line. But we have a question just wondering if RAWF has on the radar trials that might pertain to cognitive studies that may use medicine or not. I'm not aware of any. um, Certainly we want them, and again, that's where registry data can influence research, because if we start seeing in treatment priorities that people are anxious to get more studies around the cognitive issues, perhaps we can then start, engaging young scientists and young researchers to take on pilot studies in that area. And I think that is a big issue in our patient community and one that is a huge unmet need.
I agree. I told you after we have hyperphagia taken care of, that's the next thing is cognitive stuff.
Yeah.
There are a couple of potential drug targets for that and a couple of companies that are interested in that. And I do think it's the next area of exploration for sure, because it is a huge unmet need. But again, if you don't have the registry data to support that, it doesn't matter how much I say it, right? Or other clinicians say it. It really needs to be backed up by data that this is a huge
Yeah.
unmet need in the population.
100%. All right. Well, I think that wraps us up for today. Jen, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I know you had a super busy day and you still made time, and we so appreciate it. And thank you, everyone who joined us for this webinar. And I hope that you feel empowered and motivated to participate in research because we are gaining such ground. I'm so excited about the things that are becoming available to our patient community. And I feel like it's just the tip of the iceberg. So let's keep working hard and working together to make this better for everyone. So
Absolutely. Better quality of
thank
life.
you. Yes, please. Anyway, thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you, Amy. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.